Their job is to be calm in that moment, right? Well, they can't be calm if they're not happy. If they're stressed out and everything's urgent, I can be far more effective and price conscious than if I had a building and I fill that building up with 20 people. I mean, that would drive our cost up substantially. And that makes sense. I want to do that project again. That's a real clear indicator that you need to find a way so that you're not doing that. So, I mean, I pay attention a lot to the body. I remember my response was, what are you talking about exit strategy? I just started this, right? And now I think about that a lot. And when I started my new company, very clearly have an exit strategy.
So those clips were just a taste. Dylan Bost has lived a lot of life, the agency grind, the crash, the rebuild, and he came out with a very clear philosophy about how to run a business that actually fits your life. In this episode, we get into the real stuff. What alignment actually looks like in practice, how he designs his business around space instead of hustle, what Disney taught him about client experience, and what it means to build a personal brand when you're doing more than one thing. This is Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm Nikhil. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to a new episode of Unfiltered Solopreneur. I'm your host, Nikhil. My next guest is a Disney Imagineering alum and self-proclaimed starter who lost everything in 2008, only to rebuild a business and a life that prioritizes human connection over corporate blueprints. Dylan, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, I'm excited for our conversation. We have a fair amount of ground to cover. So now, you came from architecture and Disney, two places built on planning and choreography, right? But then you're running this 25-person agency. You weren't dealing with blueprints. You were suddenly dealing with this thing we call humans. Can you take me to a specific moment when you realized that people and business don't follow the plan?
Wow. There's a lot, right? I think that, I in that world, I kind of got trapped because, so I have found myself like most people in that making ourselves busy equals success, equals accomplishment. Now I've learned that that's not the case, right? But I think that, there were many times in that world that when I didn't actually know, but now it's more of a reflection back and saying it wasn't until really one existential moment that I stood up in my office, I remember, and I said, and it was a scary moment. And I said, why am I doing this? Everything was working. Lots of clients, lots of staff, really fantastic people that I worked with across the board. But for me, and that was the early understanding of before I could put the word on it, of alignment. That the company was not aligned with what in my core I wanted. And to make it even more scary, I didn't know what that was. So it was, but then again, you run a business and right? There's a stack of phone calls, a stack of emails, things that aren't right in the world, in that agency world. God bless those people that are listening to this that are running agencies. It is a whack-a-mole environment, right? There's an ad campaign with a never-ending, number of issues you're dealing with, building a website, building the brand, running, ad campaigns all over the place. There's always something that's not right. I think one of the areas that was a big aha for me was when it came to print items. And I know there's not a lot of that going on right now, right? But you're printing these brochures. And at the time, I remember we were printing, we had a project we did a lot of work in real estate and development. And so, developer's going to build a big building. They've got 100 condos. You need to, of course, promote those condos and sell them before they build the building. And that came with a bunch of things. But when it came to, developing these brochures, you would print these brochures and they may cost $15,000, $20,000. So you can't make a mistake, right? It becomes concrete at that point. Web, right? You make a mistake, you can get in there and fix it. And then no one else sees that. And it's a little bit more forgiving. But I remember, that was one of the areas that was, I often said, I don't ever want to do those again, right? Because the responsibility level is too high.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the funny thing is, in the corporate world, we're always taught to make plans, right? Concrete plans and follow them to a T. But when you're running your own business, the first thing I learned is you make plans and you put them away because
Yeah.
things will happen. Like you said, it's whack-a-mole. You have,
Yeah.
it feels like you have a lot less control over a smaller environment than you do a larger one, right? And maybe that's because
100%.
the bureaucratic system sort of keep the machinery running, right? So
Yeah.
it's easier in a large corporation, which can also be a frustration. So
Right. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
at least for me, it was a lot of unlearning corporate behavior when I
Yep.
came to running my own business.
Yeah, fortunately, I didn't have that. I mean, it was, and I think that's one of the things. I had a really incredible partner at the time, and
Yeah.
we celebrated the fact that we didn't. We started an agency, just the two of us. Well, to be fair, we started a web design company that developed into an agency. And so we learned while we did it, and we learned from the mistakes, and so we didn't, and often I think that's why we worked really well with clients is we didn't necessarily, we had a process. Sure, everybody has a process, and we had protocols and things like that, but we also gave ourselves kind of a lot of freedom in there because we didn't have like, here's the standard way that we approach this thing. We always do it this way. It's always worked. Because what I found is, the world, and now more than ever is changing so rapidly. What worked last year probably doesn't work this year. And you've got to pay attention to that. But yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, and you're right. What works for one client doesn't necessarily work for the next
No,
one, right? And
no.
I remember, when we had an agency years ago too, that was one of the things we always used to say is no round pegs, square holes, right?
Right.
We assess the problem first, understand what you need before we come and sell you our solution.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned an existential crisis. Now you've been open about the 2008 crash, bankruptcy, nearly losing your family. So when did it hit you that you couldn't think your way out of this? And what did it feel like to be someone you said who always had the answers and suddenly to not have one?
Man, it was a dark hole. There's no doubt. And to make matters worse, I held on for dear life because I was convinced that the fix was around the corner, right? I was convinced that, and I'm writing a book right now, and I'm actually in this section where I've really explored that more deeply. And, it wasn't, I can honestly say there was not, I mean, yes, I had an ego, but for me, it wasn't about, if this fails, what will it look like? It was very much like, if this fails, I have a responsibility to these people. And that was the hard part, was really trying to come to grips with that. And unfortunately, because of that, I didn't make hard decisions early. I didn't decide to lay people off. I thought, what, we can grip this. People took pay cuts and things like that, which honestly just made it more difficult, because then it's like, I'm gathering up this group of people to be on the side. We're all on the same ship. We can do this together. And in reality, it just was a really slow burn down to where it just became, not sustainable at some point.
Yeah, and on a personal level too, you said it sort of impacted you, right? You sort of were burning the candle at both ends.
Well, yeah, because it was, I was, spinning a bunch of plates, right?
Yeah.
So, and did not give near enough attention to the most important plates, which were my family. And so, in some way, I really, in this weird, I don't know if anyone can understand this, quite frankly, but I felt in a way that my family lived on Mars and I was on Venus. And for some reason, Mars was going to be okay, right? Even though the reality was, we were on the same planet, and more importantly, we were very closely connected, and their survival depended on me. And so it was this almost this weird disassociation between those two things. So it was kind of like, I always felt like fixing is going to fix that. In reality, it didn't. What would have helped is simply being more open, right? Reaching out to my wife and saying, hey, what do you think? I know this sucks, but what can we do? How can you support me? I didn't do that. I didn't go to mentors. I didn't go to friends. I literally just said, I've been the person that I've made it this far, and I've been through hard things, but never anything like this. It just really got to a place where there was no way out. But I look back at that and I made that happen. I basically put myself in, it's existentially, or maybe even esoterically, when I look at that, at the end of the day, I go back to that alignment thing, right? In my office when things were working well. In essence, what I did is rather than at that point say, how can I pivot or how can I exit this company? What can I do now? I basically unconsciously let it crash so that I could get out. I mean, that's a really hard thing to swallow, but it's the truth.
Yeah, but you raised some really good points, right? I mean, it is, and maybe for a certain generation of men, it's more so. It's hard to ask for help, right? We're never taught to do that, and also when so many things are resting on your shoulders, you feel responsible. I mean, I've had mouths to feed when I ran the old agency, so you kind of stay up at night, feeling like you have to do the right thing, even if you're digging a deeper hole. Your conscious mind is telling you have to keep going because there are people relying on you, even if it's the wrong thing to do, right? So I know it's
totally
it's a difficult thing, and also, I think one thing we don't talk enough about is understanding when to pivot or to end something is actually not a failure, right?
right.
That is, yeah, we discuss it and describe it as failure, but
Yeah.
understanding that this thing can go no further is not failure. That is actually, I think we need to reframe that.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. That comes down, part of that's planning. I tell this story a lot. I remember when my partner and I started the company, and then I can't remember who it was, but I got in front of somebody and they were asking me business questions. I've never run a business, and yet here I am doing it. And they said, "What's your exit strategy?" And I remember my response was, "What are you talking about, exit strategy? I just started this." Right. And now I think about that a lot. And when I started my new company, very clearly have an exit strategy. I mean, the reality is without that plan, it doesn't mean it can't change, right? But without deciding, here's the end point to that. So there's a long game to that, as well as, like you're saying, there's shorter pieces to that. When you say, okay, there's constant pressure from this thing every single day or every week. I either need to fix that, put a process in place, put people in place, exit myself from that specific situation, or make a bigger change. And I think it's very important that we do that we get honest with ourselves. And one of the things I've been asked this question a bunch of times, it's like, what structure do you put in place? For me, it's very simple. I look at weekly. I look back and I say, where are the areas where I didn't enjoy what I was doing? And we all have things that we don't enjoy, and there's a threshold to that. But where did I not enjoy things? And then where was I just not good? And then I make the decision, well, I either need to get good at that. And what's worse is if those two things coincide, right? If I'm not good at it and I didn't like it, to me, that's a clear indicator now that I need to, maybe that's a service we provide that we shouldn't be providing, right? Maybe we've extended ourselves outside our brand platform. Or maybe it's just something that I need to have another human being be in place, or some technology system take that over. I need to stop doing it, right? I mean, because I'm just creating a headache for myself. But I think that's this loop that we get into, right? It's like we think that, oh, I'm performing, I'm overcoming this thing, when in reality, we need to take a step back and put something else into place.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I love those filters that you use. And you might have sort of jumped ahead into my next question, because what I was going to ask you is, you mentioned that your second go around was about alignment, which you mentioned a few times with your whole self, right? So you focused more on rebuilding relationships and seeking joy rather than just being busy. So paint me a picture then. What does Tuesday look like now that would have been impossible in those agency days?
A lot of space. That's the first and foremost. So when I took a look at Contrast first company was, essentially, how am I going to make money? What are we going to do? Right? Okay, we've identified this thing that we can do. We have this capability. Now we're going to go do it, and it's going to make money. So one-dimensional, right? It doesn't really address, well, what else is in my life? I mean, let's just start simply. Like, I have a wife and I have 3 children that I want to have time for. That didn't address that. So very clearly what I did in the second company is decide, okay, based on this, I need to find, there were a set of parameters. I want to find something that requires no more of my time. In the beginning, obviously, full on, but when it's running, right, it requires no more than my time than like 6 hours a day. It was really important to me. And then even inside that, so that was a clear distinction, so that I'm working, say 30 hours a week, 25 hours a week on the business. I can do more, obviously, but it was clear to me that I need to have that time, because things happen in your family. And what I noticed the first go around was I'm not available because I constantly have other things that I've said are more important. And in reality, then what do you miss out on? You miss out on taking your kid to soccer, or you miss out on just hearing about their day, right? You miss out on sharing your experiences with your wife because you're too tired. So I made sure to build that time in. And then today, even, I try to expand that more. And when I say for me, this is a kind of a core principle for as we develop our culture, that, when I look at it this way, we have about one employee per 100 customers, and there's some overlap, there's some extra. And because my goal is, I don't want to, when I say optimize one of our staff members' time, what that doesn't mean is I'm trying to squeeze out every single minute of the day in an 8-hour period. That was a really an incorrect, way of looking at things. For me, it's about, I want them to be happy and have fun in their day. Because I know if they're a happy person, right, then, and their customer service, then they're transferring that over to our customers. Of course, we're dealing with people, hey, something's broken, I'm freaked out, I don't know how to fix it. And so their job is to be calm in that moment, right? Well, they can't be calm if they're not happy, if they're stressed out and everything's urgent. So we've written a lot of that into the kind of core principles in the way that we work. And then the idea too is giving them enough breadth so that they can explore fun things even during their work time. And I stole that from Google. I remember reading Google Maps literally came from a Google employee, because at the time, and I don't know if this is still the case, but this is probably 15, 20 years ago, I read about this, that, Google essentially wanted their employees to be about 60% productive, giving them a good 40% of their time to basically do whatever they wanted to do. Because what they learned, right, is that these guys are super smart people. So what are they doing all day long? Coming up with super smart things. And there it is. Google Maps was developed by an employee that had an idea and developed that on his own. And now you have this incredible Google product because of that. And now, I mean, that might be a little self-serving for Google, but it works. But I looked at that more broadly in saying, great, if they come up with something for us, it's great. But at very least, the minimum, I'm introducing a more relaxed environment. At most likely what they're doing is they're having the time to recognize something that's flawed in the system, right? They're saying, you know what, Dylan, this doesn't work the way we're doing it. The way we're updating websites is taking far too long. And, it gives them the breadth. Otherwise, they're just moving, right? They're just moving through the day and answering tickets and trying to solve a bunch of problems. They don't have the time to help the company innovate and move forward.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I agree with you. I think space is critical to growth, right? Like you said, and companies have sort of gotten onto this productivity bandwagon, and maybe it's become worse since the pandemic, right? Where they're even watching like keystrokes and the amount of hours now that people are attending from home. And I've always believed, like, let people get their work done. If it takes them 2 hours or 3 hours to get an 8-hour day done, good for them, right?
Yeah,
Give
right.
them the space
Yay.
And also you enrich whatever focus you have gets enriched when you broaden that perspective, right? When you bring in other things. That's one of the things I love about strategy. You've been a strategist too, is, connecting different dots that don't necessarily sit even in the same galaxy, right? Leave alone the solar system. So no, I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
So I want to shift gears now a little bit to brand building and marketing. So you said something very honest in our call, right? For Sunny HQ, your website hosting business, you don't have employees, but you have people, but people sort of need to believe that you do, right? So what's a moment when you felt that friction in real life? Was it like a prospect saying something that made you go, okay, that's what they're worried about? Talk to me about that.
Some of that's probably old baggage. I think that, people want to, I think it's less so today. There's more of an understanding that, here's the thing, right? You have to first you have to make that leap. You have to be willing to accept that and be willing to explain more so to a prospect than an existing, customer, because they can see the proof is in the pudding. But most of that came from, I remember, my agency life, there's almost like a look that you need to have, right? There's not, you need to look a certain way. I often said early in my agency life, I was like, we know all the things, but and I look a little younger and did then. And so it was kind of like, I was like, they don't want to buy this from a guy that looks like he's in their 20s. They want to buy this, this marketing strategy from someone who's done it for 20 years and who looks like, and the same thing goes for the agency. It's like, they want to walk in and see that. I think today, especially with technology solutions, it's definitely more acceptable that work is distributed. And I think the way that I talk about that with our customers, is it comes down to price. It comes down to, we're able to be this effective, more effective, because of the structure of the company. I can be far more effective and price conscious than if I had a building and I fill that building up with 20 people. That would drive our cost up substantially. And that makes sense. I put it in, business terms, and they go, oh, that makes sense. I realize that too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In fact, but I agree with you about the perception, right? I once had a client turn us down because we didn't have an office space.
Yeah.
She absolutely wanted an office space. She ended up coming back to us when she realized, the quality of the work matters more than a physical location.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hear you. That sometimes you have to sort of, it's almost like a, what do you call it? A trust builder, right? For people.
Sure. Yeah.
But as long as things work, I don't think people really care. I always say people don't really care how the sausage gets made, right? When they're buying a solution, they really care about, are you solving the problem or not?
Well, yeah, and I think it comes down to communication, right? So I think that if you communicate effectively and meaningfully, right, then that can fill a lot of the gaps. If it looks like you're one guy running a whole bunch of stuff and it feels like it, because people can feel like it, like you can, like, great, you know what, anybody can go out there with a few $1,000s, develop a really fantastic brand, make a really nice website, and you can look big. But if you can't stand behind that with the quality of the service, like you said, and the level of communication, then it all falls apart. And people can really feel that more than anything.
True. So you also mentioned to me that when your customers call with a problem, they say, my site is broken, right? But what you're actually providing is critical thinking to solve it. So I'm curious, what do people think they're signing up for versus what they tell you they value most, say 90 days in, right? Once they've experienced it.
Well, that's the cool thing for us. It's actually where I think today we fulfill the promise that they believe should be there anyways. So I think we're meeting the expectation. I believe, and that's why I started the company, is that I saw firsthand, the average business, whoever that is, whether it's the owner that's running everything, or whether it's a marketing director, whether it's the IT guy, whatever it is, the reality is, their expectation, I believe, with hosting is completely out of alignment with what is generally available. Right. And it's a language difference, right? Hosting has become something, but when someone says hosting, if you asked any of our customers, if you ask people to come to us, they have the same problem. Like the problem is something has been wrong with the site. I've needed to update the site. I've needed to change something, whatever it is, and it's not getting done. And when I dig into that with them, they're like, well, I keep telling them it's broken. And then they give me back this information, right? And that information usually means, well, you should check this and you should check that. And they're like, well, why aren't you doing that? And I think that's our biggest education part is up front is simply saying, we do what you would expect us to do. And then we walk through that. I was like, so and I sometimes ask people, but most of the time I say, let me tell you what I think is going on. And then they're just nodding, they're like, yeah, I'm saying the form doesn't work, but they keep responding to me that I need to check something with Zapier and check to see if the SMTP protocol is, and I don't know what any of that means, right? And my argument is That's what you're there for. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't go to, I don't take my car in and get down to, what, it sounds exactly like the rotors to me, and I'm sure there's a few people out there that know that, but the reality is, or what, this has got to be the alternator, or typically I go in and it's like, it's making this sound. Right? That's what we say. Exactly. It's making this sound. Yeah. Can you fix it? And that guy's like, yeah, sure we can. They don't get back to him and say, well, have you checked these 5 different systems? They just fix it. And so that's really what we do. And to me, it sounds like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I know. But, when you describe it, I completely agree with you. And I'm sitting here thinking of my hosting provider and the number of times I've been on the line and they've gone me and some of the stuff they're like, have you looked at this? And I'm like, well, no, because I don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And
well, and they're not fraudulent about it. No. I mean, they're not malicious. The reality is it's like they're literally speaking Japanese and you're speaking English. And they, to them, that is what they're doing, their job. And I think that's the biggest part. It's just a miss in communication.
Yeah, and it's such a simple fix that I'm amazed that so many companies haven't done it. And maybe it's just a training issue, right? That they sort of hire technical people who are good at fixing stuff, but not necessarily explaining, like you do in human speak, like you said, in English versus Japanese.
Well, yeah, and I think it's super complicated. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me. We have some, not so much with basic sites, but with a lot of e-commerce websites. And then as soon as you start to graduate into now connected to CRMs and ERPs and every other acronym out there, now you've started to make this site, where, you're into that medium-sized business where their website is really doing a lot. It is amazingly complex, right? I mean, we're depending on other systems to work, yet the symptom is on your website. So of course it takes such a broad level. So, I mean, I'm definitely not, throwing mud at these guys. The reality is I see it, right? What it takes us is now what I've done is I've developed an incredible network of people so that there's not much that we can't figure out. But then again, that's what I say we're going to do, but here's the miss in the market, right? That's the expectation, but that's not exactly what hosting is. I mean, honestly, in the world of hosting, it is quite literally a container where you put your stuff. And at best with managed hosting, it's then on top of that, it is that company's responsibility to check and make sure that software is running. Right. Mm-hmm. But the software, and again, so here we've already gone off, the end user has no concept that there's server software, application software, there's Apache running on top of this, there's PHP software, there's all, they don't care. They shouldn't have to care. But the reality is, so that's where the problem comes in. And so what I found is that by simply, standing by that promise and then getting the right skill sets involved, and being calm about it is another key, right? We don't approach things with urgency. We take a real step back. This is something that's a daily thing with the people that I work with, right? I'm constantly saying, we have you step back and just take a look at that. Probably instead of trying to fix that thing, what if we just, restore the website and then see what the differences is between the staging site and the live site, right. And very often, but there again, what I just said, the typical host doesn't even do that, right? You're responsible for that. So now you have to have an outside person that's doing that. And then we have a real Apple approach to it, right? I mean, so we're maintaining the environment and providing the support. So you've got a problem with your Apple computer. You don't go to a guy that works on computers, you go to Apple. And Apple has an expectation because they control that environment end to end, like the outcome, they understand more about the complexity of it too, right? So if it's a piece of software or maybe, some cache needs to be flushed somewhere, but the reality is they have control, and that's what I've seen. And that enables us to lessen the amount of support issues because we control that whole environment. We won't literally work with a customer who hosts on WP Engine or Kinsta or HostSlinger, because all of those systems are different. And a lot of them, in my opinion, lack even though they sell super high end hosting, a lot of them lack the technical things that we have in place that allow us, quite frankly, not have to worry about things. I mean, we have caching systems and backups that we know the way they work. And quite frankly, they work all the time. And so, and we've reduced the variables too, right? I mean, that's another thing. When we bring a site on, typically you've got plugins for all the things I just said. I've got a caching plugin, an image optimized plugin, and a security plugin. And maybe I've installed 2 security plugins because I don't even really know what the security plugins do. And all of a sudden, those are creating a bunch of problems. First thing we do is strip all that out. And the cool thing is, website just runs faster. And by the way, for all of our customers, the same caching system is there. The same image optimization is there. So if we find a problem with one thing, all of a sudden it's fixed for everybody. And that's a real key advantage.
Yeah, no, I see. There's clearly a gap there. So I want to shift gears a little bit again.
Yeah.
In addition to Sunny HQ, you mentioned you have sub companies, new software products. You also consult with nonprofits. So looking at your own brand from the outside, does having so many different balls rolling feel like it's sort of diluting what Dylan Bost wants to be known for? Or have you found like a red thread that ties every single one of those things that you're sort of focused on or doing together?
We hold pretty tight to the core, which is hosting, maintenance, and support. And we do some development work. That's where we stretch a little bit. I am, to say apprehensive about it is probably to sugarcoat it, but when we do development work, for instance, we only do development work for existing customers. So we keep that really controlled, because the last thing I wanted is web development on its own is a super challenging thing. It takes anywhere from 2 months to could take a year to do a large project. And I don't want, my attention or any of the people that work with us, their attention to not be on that core. And so we do hold tight to that. When we expand outside of that, it's really on a onesie twosie basis. And the reality is I end up doing some of that, and it's more of a passion. I do work with a lot of nonprofits because I think they're underserved. Typically, I can't tell you the number of nonprofits that come to us, and we actually have a nonprofit program. So we give them a huge discount. In some cases, we give them free hosting. And the reason is because I've seen it. I've worked with nonprofits even back into my agency life, when I saw that, these people almost know the least about this world in the hosting world, right? In the technology space. And yet they get charged the most, and it's really disheartening. And so most of the time, if I see something and it just touches my heart, I help them build a website and work with the staff to do that. And then we help give them discounts on their web hosting. But outside that, I guess in the future, what I'm looking at, there's a lot of things going on, of course, right now with AI. We're seeing a pretty big opening in the market space for instance, generative engine optimization, and we're being asked that question more and more. To be honest, I have always had a super hard time finding a really trusted source for even search engine marketing. And so we're looking possibly at what if we were to have an entity that does specifically GEO, but even in that, we'll be very careful in how we architect that. That will more than likely be its own entity. They'll be free to market and sell to anyone and everyone, but they'll be built in. So it'll be a name branded company on its own, because I do really feel like it's important, that the companies really focus tightly, narrowly on the services that they provide. I think that's the only way. We could do more, but it means staff has to grow exponentially. Yeah. We've developed this really great ability we can scale now. Like I said, 1 person per 100 customers, that gives us a lot of ability to not have to rush to hire the wrong person, right? To really have someone in the right place, to continue to deliver a really high level of service. And so, in the way that I've seen it, the only way to do that is to keep doing this thing really, really well.
Yeah, no, I get Sunny HQ's focus stays to at the core, right? But I was thinking
Hmm.
more about as you're building your personal brand also, right?
Yeah.
You're doing some of the other things. So that I was looking for sort of a thread there.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that, I think with that, I mean, I think I told you I'm writing a book. I'm
Yeah.
a year in, and I'll finish. All goes well into next week. I'll have the manuscript done, and
Wow.
that has become. I've seen that well, and I've looked at. I'm about to start a company that's got a software product around specifically prompt engineering with AI, and what I've been able to do is parlay exponentially the learning that I took from my agency failure into how I developed this new company to set super tight parameters around these other endeavors. And
Right.
there again, if you flash back to what we talked about early on, I started Sunny HQ with built-in time, and this was
Yeah.
the reason why I did that. I knew I love new things, right? I mean, I love new things. And so Sunny HQ is requiring less and less time because it's working. And if something requires too much, back again, I evaluate it. Do I need to be doing it? Do I belong in that, or is my time better spent here? And so that's given me the freedom to do that. And honestly, I'm finding those things are wonderful for just how I feel about Sunny HQ, because if I'm refreshed and enjoy things, and I'm not I'm not doing the same thing every day, because for me, I really need a lot of change, then
Yeah.
that's providing that avenue for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, as you said, it's sort of like you once you create that space, you can do more things. And again, going back to what I was saying earlier, it actually enriches the focus too, right? Because you bring
Yeah.
different perspectives to it now. I want to ask you about your book. So now you sort of you said you're almost done with your book. You're also going to
Yep.
do some speaking engagements, master classes, I think. So tell me what's happening in someone's life when they hear your message and go, "Oh, this is for me." Like, what's the moment they're in?
Well, I think it's speaking to, and this is from, so I've at least shared the first opening and chapter with some publishers at this point, and kind of an inner circle, and honestly, with no expectation other than, can I have some notes? Does this make sense? Do you like it at all? And what's interesting, I actually heard back from one of the publishers who got me on a call and just started with, Dylan, this spoke directly to me. I went through exactly what you were saying. I'm 60 and I changed positions. My boss thought I was crazy. She was super high up, chief financial officer for a company, and shifted into publishing. And she said, I wish I had this, 5 years ago. And so I think but it's a couple of things. So that's like one of the big topics, of course, is that burnout and the decisions that I could have made. And more importantly, the reflection on that, and essentially the things that I've put in place to allow me this space, to allow me to develop awareness, to allow me to respond to things instead of react to things. So a lot of that's built in, but it's also, a lot of things that are somewhat, I think they're mundane, though they're very impactful on my life. Here's how, in the same vein, here are failures with my kids, with my family, with friends, in just interpersonal relationships. And here's what I learned from that. And then the same thing applies. There's a framework to it as you walk through. There's essentially, personal reflection, and then the mirror truth from that specific mirror, and then a teaching of that, and a practice, and then how I see that in the world. So then it expands out. But so I think it's actually, at least what I'm hearing back, is it's finding its way to people who identify, maybe not with all of it, but who say, hey man, I'm going through that too. And I've never thought about that. Okay. So, and more importantly, not just aha, but I might try what he did to see if that works for me.
Yeah.
And I'm very careful when I say that, because I by no means, this is not I have the way to get you out of something. What I'm definitely saying is, look, I've been through a lot of different situations, and I have learned in 20 or 30 years, I've learned now how to not do that same thing again. Right. And I
Yeah.
think that's the biggest part of it, is kind of recognizing that that you can make the decision not to go down that road again.
Yeah, no, I love that. I can see why it would resonate because I think, going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think people gloss over some of the things you just talked about the
Yeah.
failures on the personal life, or, people talk about the business, but not the impact on the personal life. And like you said a few times now, we're taught that we can compartmentalize these things, but you can't. It's all
Yeah.
connected, right?
No. Oh, you
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 know,
can for a while.
yeah. I mean,
That's the
or you
thing,
can
right?
fool yourself into thinking
Yeah.
you are all the
You
time,
can for a
right? I
while,
mean,
but what I've learned is it's going to come out sideways at some
yeah,
point. It's going to come out in your behavior. It's going to come out in the decisions that you make. Worst case, it's going to come out in some form of disease or ailment.
yeah,
That is the way life works, right? I mean, we push those things down. It all becomes a form of trauma. It's stored in our body, and it needs to get out, right? And
yeah.
it's going to happen. So you're better processing it during and integrating it and going, and swallowing it and going, you know what? I learned from that. I'm not going to do that again. That's the best thing, right?
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. I think we don't talk enough about the messy, right? And
Yeah.
everything, everything, everyone's life has the
Yeah.
messy, right?
Yeah.
From childhood to adulthood to business to, you know, marriage and family. So yeah, I think we gloss over a lot of that, and a lot of these books are focused on, the blueprint or the roadmap to not be messy, right? So
Right.
yeah, I agree. So now you ran a successful high-end you run rather a successful
Mm-hmm.
high-end hosting business with zero employees, everything's outsourced. So for solopreneurs who are struggling to let go of control, how do you know when something stays on your plate but or versus going out to sort of your network?
But like I said, it comes back to that. I mean, I have very simple rules. I'm like, if I am, and now I recognize it pretty quickly. If, so how does it present in the real world? If it's
Yeah,
driving you crazy,
right.
if here's the thing I talk a lot about. It's getting in touch with your body, right? Our brains will run. The brains are a computer. Their whole job is to solve problems. When they don't have problems, or when they don't think they do, they come up with problems to solve. So, but if you listen to your body, then you'll start noticing, some easy ways. You get that email or you have a meeting with someone and you're exhausted after it.
Yeah,
That's a clear indicator that you're out of alignment with what that was. Now, and there's a distinction, right? It doesn't mean that obviously work can be challenging and you can enjoy it, or it can be in alignment and be, and make you tired. But there is a difference, and I think anybody can recognize that. The reality is, you get out of that and you're like, oh, I do not want to go to, or beforehand, right? I don't want
yeah,
to go to this meeting with this guy. I
right.
can't. That's a real clear indicator. I don't want to do that project again. That's a real clear indicator that you need to find a way so that you're not doing that. So, I mean, I pay attention a lot to the body and what it's telling me. And the more you tap into that, the better. We hear this all the time with detectives, in detective
Yeah,
shows, right? That I got this gut feeling. It's real. That is a
yeah.
very real thing. Listen to your body, right? It's so there for you.
Yeah, no, I love that lesson because you're right. It's the we know the signals, but and to be fair, a lot of the time we're sort of brought up and taught to just power through it, right? It's like
Yeah.
suck it up and deal with it. It's like, everybody hates certain things, you've just got to do it. But you're right. And especially as a solopreneur, I don't think you can afford to ignore those signals, because if you burn out, that's it, your business is burnt out, right? I mean, you don't
Yeah.
really have like, thousands of staff to rely on to keep things running. So I think
Yeah.
that's a really valuable lesson.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to touch on is like Disney clearly shaped how you think about experience, right? So you touched on
Hmm.
this a little bit with Sunny HQ, but can you give us like a specific Disney principle that a solopreneur could steal to sort of elevate, like I say, their client experience from functional to magical?
Yeah, I think Disney is so great. I mean, I blown away from the very beginning. Culture is a big part of that, and even if you're a culture of one, right? It's deciding how you show up for your customers, for your clients. And one of the things I love about Disney is I learned right away. I was like, they don't call their employees. It's literally not written anywhere in documentation. When I showed up, you spend a week in what's called traditions, and literally before you start your job, you start this week-long course where you learn everything Disney, and you learn the importance that you have. And so Disney calls their employees cast members because literally everyone has a role to play, right? And I love this. And if anyone goes to a park, you can literally ask anyone these questions and they will go on and on and on. So the guy picking up garbage, the woman at the hot dog cart, the guy running the rides, like they have gained an insight that they're not just pushing a button on the ride or serving a hot dog. Like they play an integral, and this is true. I mean, once I really opened my mind to this, it's the difference between the way Disney does this, right? And if you just go to a hot dog cart, in New York on the street, right? That person understands that they're part of an experience that family is having in that moment. And they have the ability to make or break that whole experience. Right. One of the fantastic stories, and this is all over the place, and so you may have heard it, but there was this family there. And the little girl, they left, and she realized she had left her teddy bear in the room. And of course, for anyone that has kids, that favorite teddy bear, that favorite Lammy, my daughter had a Lammy, that is like the end of the world, literally. And of course, they got on an airplane and flew home to Chicago or someplace, right? Well, of course, the family's distraught, and they call the hotel. Now, in most other environments, that thing would be gone. Right.
Lost and found or gone. Yeah.
Right. One of the cast members, not even like the manager, one of the cast members took that on herself to go find that. Right. So they went to the room. It wasn't there. They followed the whole process. They finally found it in laundry. So they find this thing. Well, they didn't just send it back. Right. They took that bear for a day to like a number of rides and a number of experiences, taking pictures. And then they sent this album back to the child with the bear, with this whole story. And I can't remember how the story went, but you can imagine it was something, no worries. Your bear was having a great time and knew you were safe and sound. And I mean, I think about that. There's so much in that for how we understand for our companies, we're delivering a promise. If we're successful, we're delivering a promise, and that promise goes way far beyond the tangible thing or the service that we deliver. It's the environment in which we're connecting with our customer or connecting with our client, and it's how they feel around us. And if you want that to flourish, and I don't just mean, they're going to pay you, that's great. But if you want that to be fun for you and enjoyable for them, then you want to create aspects of your business that encourage that. And two, especially once you start to train people that work for you, the importance is helping them to connect. Maybe they do something that they even don't think is significant. It's helping them connect with the bigger picture, as they may be this one small thing in all of this stuff, or maybe they're not delivering the product to the client. Maybe you're developing a widget and they solder one transistor or something like that. But in reality, if they didn't do that, it wouldn't work. Right. Yeah. So I think it's helping people. And that's a big part of, I think, developing, whether it's a culture of one, like I said, and helps you become really, really big in that environment if you can connect to it.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's, I think, the difference between someone doing a job and having a purpose, right? To know that they are part of the bigger picture and how they contribute to it, and how important that piece, even if it seems small, is in terms of, like you said, the mosaic of the entire experience, right? That the family has. And I absolutely love that. And that's a great way to think about hiring too. I always say hire for values, not skills, right? Not just skills. So,
yeah. You can train skill. Yeah. We used to say hire for aptitude, or hire for attitude over aptitude, right? It's, I want that. I'm going to work with this person. I always looked at it like a family member, right? Yeah. I'm going to spend a lot of time with them. I better like them. They better like me. Otherwise it's not going to work.
Yeah, I agree. No, absolutely. And it's amazing how few companies, I think they've gone the other way now. It's become sort of skill. And, anyway, so you're 55. You've been through bankruptcy, rebuilt, and you're starting more new things now. Software products, you're writing, you finished your book, you're speaking engagements. Now, most people at 55 are thinking about simplifying. What drives that entrepreneurial itch in you, and has your risk tolerance changed?
I don't know. I don't know if my risk tolerance has changed. I've always been willing to jump into really anything. I'm a big, you got to try it before you buy it. You got to make it work. You got to figure it out. But, I think that I don't know that I can imagine, the not doing it, right? I mean, I think that that purpose, in fact, I was just listening to a podcast, Andrew Huberman, and, it was interesting, he was talking about, we're always talking about all these things that can, they talked about this long list and a lot of discussion about different supplements and therapies and all these things to increase longevity. And he's like, look, you know what? I'm not saying that those things don't work. But he said, what makes the most sense in your life? Get good sleep, right? Work on your cortisol, wake up to bright lights, go to sleep to dim lights, put your phone away, learn to breathe, right? But then a key one is like your sense of community and purpose, right?
Yeah.
Without that, and I see it in my own family, with parents and grandparents and things like that. It's like, if we don't have a purpose, and if the further disconnected that we are from each other, we may live a long time, but we won't enjoy it. And so I look at like, I could get to a place where I, wish everything goodbye and I exit everything, but then what? There's only so many hobbies in a day. And in reality, I like to learn new things and figure out new things. And it's that puzzle aspect of new businesses that I find, really attractive. On the book side, this is a whole, different paradigm shift from, technology and even art and marketing and things like that. And so for me, that's really introducing this, this idea of if I can affect any change just through my experience, then, I've seen that before in some other environments, and there's honestly not much better than that. And if I had to do it again, I probably would go down that route only, because the reality is, and the more technology that enters into our space, the more people are likely to pull back. But in reality, to me, that highlights the importance of more human interaction. And so, I really look at it like, I don't see another way out. There's only so much that my kids want to see me, right? They're going to start to get married and stuff. And I know they want me around, but it's not like I can go hang around them for, a week on end. They're going to be like, Dad, go do something. We have our own lives. And so, what does that mean? It's like, well, then what effectively can I enter into this next phase of my life where I start to hopefully enact some meaningful change. And what does that look like? That could be software. It could be masterclass and teaching and mentoring, but being open to that environment. So I don't see another way out other than just keep going.
Yeah, no, I think it's important because one of the things I saw, and our father's generation, I saw this with my dad, was the moment he stopped working, he just had that was his whole identity. He had nothing else, and it was downhill from there. But also, my idea of retirement, and you'll probably love this, is just sort of working with the people and on the projects I love, right? That's my idea. And I had a brilliant guest on earlier, who gave me this new word, which I love. She said, you can now call it rewirement. And I love it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, there's no retirement in our future, Dylan.
Yeah.
We'll talk about
like
rewiring.
you said, like you said, I think, how much fun is that? I've often thought, how much fun it would be to go honestly work in like a coffee shop for a while, right? Because imagine without the pressure to need to do it, how much fun you could have doing it. So I'm literally looking at applying that. Well, I was like, well, if I could go do that, then I could do all kinds of other stuff with that. So if I approach this, instead of saying, I have to extract this from it, I need this much money from it in this amount of time, instead of going into it completely the other way and just saying, well, if I don't need any money from it whatsoever, then how much fun would that be? And then the pressure releases. And granted, the cool thing about the irony is, for anyone out there listening to that, money will come, right? The reality is, but if you shift your paradigm to say, I'm doing this because I want to, not because I have to, is a whole different way and approach that you'll have, and an energy that you'll carry with you.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's amazing, but I almost feel like you have to sort of go through it to get to that understanding, right?
Yeah.
Because we always start with, here's a business and I have to make money, and that's the most important thing, and that's the first thing, right? And then you sort of go through and realize you get to what you were just described.
Yeah.
So if we were to grab coffee 3 years from now, what's different? What are you doing? What have you built? Who have you become?
I think Sunny HQ will either be, would at that point either be running on its own with me in an advisory position, or sold, acquired by another company who recognizes, hey, I like what they're doing. I've got a lot of hosting customers. It makes sense because we can, integrate this and do a lot more with it. I would love to see that. I would, love to see, I guess my grand vision is that, by that time, I see kind of an incubator environment. So on one hand, the book will have been published and widely successful, and I'll be speaking hopefully and gathering even some kind of cohort or masterclass groups and doing that. But then there's the what next. And I really think that for me, I have always had designs on, and there are a few people in my life now that I know I would love nothing more than to have, this kind of big vanilla box envelope workspace where there's all kinds of stuff in there. There's this little audio studio over there. There's a video studio over there. There's art over there. There may be pottery over there. There may be a putting course over here for somebody that likes that, right? But workspaces, right? And not a big company. Like there's 5 of us in there, and the job is kind of a skunk works, right? Where we're like, hey, what about this? Let's flush that out. That to me sounds really enjoyable. Just that kind of day-to-day, launch a company, help someone else launch a company, right? See somebody out there that's working in some environment and say, how can we, to your point of like mentoring, how can we provide that level of just wisdom and help them succeed? I think that would be a really, really fun place to be.
And I'll be sure to swing by and buy a coffee from you.
Yeah, it'd be great. It'd be great.
So if you could offer one piece of advice to somebody wanting to start their solopreneur journey, what would you tell them?
It's got to start simple for me. It's honestly, ask yourself some deep questions. Breathe. This is not taught, but it's really learned to. This may sound silly, but really learn to breathe deep. Seek awareness that the decision you're making, understand where they come from, and then move in a direction and be willing to pivot. I think that's the key thing.
Yeah, that's great advice. So is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners that we haven't covered, Dylan?
I don't think so. No, this was great. I appreciate everything.
Okay, perfect. That brings us to our rapid fire round. So
yeah,
I'm going to throw a couple of questions at you. So what's one piece of productivity tech that you think is actually a waste of time?
Oh, there's a lot. Something really recent, I'll probably get slammed for this, but to me, Notion. I've played around with Notion. I'm actually working pretty deeply with a lot of AI systems, and that you could apply this to a lot. I'd say to people, be really careful. Here's the way I work on it. I set super tight guidelines. I can spend 30 minutes to figure out what this does for me because they all do fantastic things. But man, they can consume you like nobody's business. You can find out you're spending way too much time doing something rather than just writing a note to someone.
True. And it doesn't even necessarily fit what you want, right? By the end
right.
of it. So,
yeah.
What's one kung fu principle that surprisingly applies to your solo business?
Move slowly. Really. Yeah. There's a little bit more Tai Chi, but definitely move slowly. Okay. Yeah.
You have 2 software products in development. Can you give me the movie logline pitch for one of them? Like Alien was pitched as Jaws, but in space.
Oh, wow. Yeah, one of them right now it's kind of nicknamed Prompt Nemo. So it's I guess it's. I don't know that I can come up with it that fast, but I mean, they basically, a to-do list library.
Oh, that's cool. I like that. What success metric do you think is a trap for solopreneurs?
Productivity. I think, the success measure is probably, I can probably tell you more ones I like more than the ones because I focus on this. But for us, very clearly, site traffic. I think that and this could apply to not just website, but I think inbound questions versus the quality versus the quality side of that, right? I mean, that measuring, oh, I've got this much visibility. Visibility doesn't really matter so much. We want viable opportunity over visibility.
True. So you have an architecture degree, right? So architects often talk about beautiful ruins. What's the most beautiful thing that grew out of the ruins of your 2008 bankruptcy?
My connection with my family, for sure.
That's a great note to end the show on, Dylan.
Hands down.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of fun. Appreciate your time and all the wisdom that you shared today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Here are my takeaways from Dylan's story and what you can actually use in your business. First, alignment isn't a personal growth concept. Alignment is a business model decision. Dylan admitted he didn't pivot or exit his agency when the signs were there. Instead, he unconsciously let it crash so he could be done with it. I'm not saying that for drama. I'm saying it because I see this all the time with solopreneurs. You build something, it looks great on paper, but it starts to feel off. And instead of asking the hard question, is this what I actually want to be doing? You keep grinding. Then the business collects a quiet tax. Burnout, under-delivering, or resenting the very thing you work so hard to build. So start treating intuition as an early warning system for your P&L. If a service or a client type is consistently draining you, it's not a tough phase to power through. It's a flaw in your model. Stop waiting for a crash to give you permission to change. Second, space as a business model, not a luxury. Dylan designed his second company around time first and revenue second. He set a hard rule, no more than 6 hours a day once it's running. Now, most solopreneurs I talk to build it the other way. They pile on the work and hope someday they'll buy back their time. Dylan flipped that. He decided what kind of life he wanted first, then reverse engineered the business to fit it. As a solopreneur, working at 100% capacity isn't hustle, it's a liability. You have no room to connect the dots, spot the shift, or pivot when the market moves. So when you're building or refining your next offer, ask yourself, does this offer require more of me and my time, or can I design it so it runs with clear boundaries? Third lesson is about the power of translation. Dylan's whole hosting philosophy is basically customers shouldn't need to speak the technical language to get the outcome they want. That's what trust feels like. When you can take complexity and turn it into simplicity, not dumbed down or stupid, just clear and calm, you stop competing on features and start competing on relief. And relief is a premium experience. Look at your products and offers and ask, would someone completely outside my industry understand what I'm selling and why it matters to them? Because if the answer is no, you're asking your client to decode your process, your framework, your jargon, and that friction is costing you clients. Your job is to make the next step feel obvious, not a puzzle to solve. And lastly, I love the Disney principle Dylan shared, treating everyone as a cast member, part of a bigger experience, even if you're a company of one. Because your brand isn't your logo or your website. It's the story people tell themselves while they're working with you. And if you want clients to describe you as magical, it usually comes down to the small human moments, how you respond when something breaks, how calm you are, and whether they feel cared for instead of processed. You don't need a bigger team to create that kind of experience. You just need a higher bar for the small moments. Think about your last 3 client interactions, not the deliverable, but how it felt for them to work with you. Did you bring urgency or calm? Did you acknowledge their stress or just check a task off your list? That's the gap most solopreneurs miss. And clients rarely leave because the work is bad. They leave or don't refer because of how the experience felt. My challenge to you this week is to borrow Dylan's weekly reflection process and run it on your own week. So look back at your calendar for the last 7 days and ask yourself, 1, did I enjoy doing this? And 2, am I actually good at this? For the items that are a no on both counts, that is a flaw in your model. Your goal isn't to power through those tasks. It's to decide, automate, outsource, or cut. Because that's how you make room for space that you actually need to grow. Thanks for listening to Unfiltered Solopreneur. If you're listening to this and realizing something in your business feels off, but you can't quite put your finger on it, that's exactly the kind of problem I help solve. I'm offering a limited number of free 40-minute brand clarity sessions to help you spot what's missing and define your next move. Book it at clarity.boostsolo.com or through the link in the show notes. Until next time, keep breaking free from the corporate grind, and remember, your story is your most powerful asset. Live solo or die corporate.